first. So Ollie, if you want to go ahead and give a quick overview of EcoZoom, that would be great.
Sure, thanks. Well, for me it's good afternoon, everybody, because I'm in Nairobi, Kenya, but my name is Ollie Raisin. I'm the CEO of EcoZoom. EcoZoom is actually two companies. We have EcoZoom Global and EcoZoom East Africa. EcoZoom Global trades primarily cook stoves, but also solar lights in about 21 countries globally, primarily in Africa. And we have EcoZoom East Africa, which is focused in Kenya, all of our teams here in Nairobi, but we're expanding across the East African region, across into Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda. Like I say, we are a cook stove and solar lighting company, originally established as a cook stove company, but since realized there was an opportunity to sell customers both products. A lot of our customers were interested in both cook stoves and solar lighting, which is why we expanded our product portfolio across that range. We are currently achieving revenues of about $2.5 million per annum, and we've been profitable for about 12 months. So I wouldn't say that we have scaled. I don't know if any company can ever say they've truly scaled because it's a continuous process. But we are in the process of scaling, and and therefore I'm happy to talk about the experiences that we've had and we continue to have in the process of scaling a social enterprise.
Great, thanks, Ollie. So I'm Amanda West. I'm one of the founders of EcoZoom. I was with EcoZoom from 2011 to about 2016. I'm now a portfolio manager on the social ventures team at Mercy Corps, and I'm trying to advance the slide to show you that, but something's gone wrong. For anyone who's not familiar with Mercy Corps, we're an international NGO that empowers people to survive through crisis, to build better lives, and to transform their communities for good. Our programming is very diverse, so it ranges from responding to the Syrian refugee crisis, to countering violent extremism in Nigeria, to training smallholder farmers in Indonesia. We have offices in 40 countries around the globe and about 5,000 staff. We also believe that social entrepreneurs like you are at the forefront of introducing new business models and often new technologies with the potential to deliver sustainable impact at scale. So the Social Ventures team manages two funds to help support entrepreneurs. One is the Mercy Corps Social Venture Fund. That's our seed stage equity investment fund that we've designed to help entrepreneurs overcome barriers to growth by providing them with capital, targeted post-investment support, and connections to the Mercy Corps platform. The other fund that we support is called the Innovation Investment Alliance. That's a funding and learning partnership between USAID and the Skoll Foundation. So since 2013, the Innovation Investment Alliance has invested almost $50 million in 8 proven transformative enterprises to scale their impact. So over the past few years, we've had a lot of experience thinking about scale and watching and supporting organizations to reach scale or to try to scale their impact in a meaningful way. And sorry, Kavanaugh, I'm still having trouble with the slide, if you don't mind advancing. Great. So like I said, over the last few years, we've thought a lot about this question of scale. Why is it so elusive? Why is it so hard? How have we learned to create these small exceptions that can change the lives of hundreds, but we've not yet learned how to make those exceptions to the rule that can really change the lives of millions. So because we've been thinking about this, last year we started the learning component of our partnership. Next slide. The learning component of our partnership by partnering with the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship at Duke University, the CASE at Duke University. to pull out some of the lessons on scaling that these enterprises are learning, so that we can continue to inform this ongoing conversation of how do you create sustainable impact at scale. So we created the Scaling Pathways series and launched it in May of this year. Right now, the series has 2 components to it. The first component are 3 in-depth case studies of our first 3 investments in the Innovation Investment Alliance. So we have a case study on Amazon, an organization that uses open source data, satellite tracking, and new technologies to promote sustainable development of the Brazilian Amazon. Another case study on Evidence Action. Some of you may be familiar with them. They work in Kenya, Uganda, and Malawi to install chlorine dispensers at community water points, and then do education for the community about the importance of drinking clean water and how chlorine can provide that to them, in an effort to increase rates of household chlorination. And lastly, a case study on Vision Spring. It's a global organization that works to make eyeglasses accessible and affordable to the base of the pyramid. So from those 3 case studies, we wrote a second paper called Pivoting to Impact. So this paper distills critical lessons learned that cut across the geographies and sectors of these organizations. And Pivoting to Impact is what we'll be talking about today. Next slide. So today is all about scaling pathways plus EcoZoom. Ollie and I wanted to relate the content in the Scaling Pathways series to our experiences at EcoZoom. So today we'll discuss some of the things that we did well in relation to the common scaling roadblocks identified in Pivoting to Impact, some things that we didn't do so well in relation to those roadblocks, and some things that we're just thinking about now on our scaling journey. Like Ollie said, we don't think EcoZoom is at scale. Like we're still on our pathway. We're in the middle of our scaling journey. And we really want to share our experiences so we can contribute to demystifying scaling in the social enterprise space, because we think that's what's needed to solve entrenched development challenges like access to clean energy. Next slide. So let's dive in. In Scaling Pathways, we have like 3 big takeaways on scaling. The first big key takeaway is that scaling is not linear. The road to scale is really complex, and it's often frustrating. So iteration and experimentation need to go beyond just the pilot phases of what you're doing. They always need to be present in your business. Because what works at one level of scale, like 100 units, 100 cook stoves or 1,000 cook stoves, might not work at a higher level of scale, 10,000, 100,000, a million. And what works in one geography may not work in another geography. So enterprises need to continuously experiment with new processes, new systems, new products as their organization matures and the ecosystem around you changes. And Ollie has a couple of examples from EcoZoom on this.
Is that my cue to dive in, Amanda?
That's your cue.
Okay, so on the scaling is not linear. Yeah, first things first. I mean, it's always a challenge, I think, when you talk about scale, particularly when you start moving across different markets. And that's a key challenge that EcoZoom is facing right now. So having established the EcoZoom East Africa company in 2013, we've been in the Kenya market now for 4 years, and we really understand that market. For example, in Kenya, we've achieved some pretty moderate success by partnering with microfinance institutions as strategic partners. Because with an improved cook stove, one of the key challenges is always how does the market afford the product? How do they overcome that affordability hurdle? Now, when we start moving into Tanzania, which is one of the challenges, one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment, the MFI market is nowhere near as mature. It doesn't have the same infrastructure. So it would be complacent of us to assume that we can just continue along that strategy for a new market. For a similar example, when we look at Uganda, I mean, Kenya is way ahead of Uganda in terms of customer willingness to pay for an improved cook stove. Partly because there are other companies like Burn and EnviroFit also present in the market, and in the case of EnviroFit, they've been in the market quite a bit longer than we have. So people are already sensitized to this idea that they you know, if they want to get a decent return on investment from a cook stove, then they need to be prepared to spend $40, maybe $45, whatever that may be in the local currency. Now, 18 months ago, a consultant did a study on consumer willingness to pay in the Uganda market, and the feedback came back at $11. Well, that presents a challenge. I mean, clearly we can't, you know, the market isn't ready for us to start launching our existing product range of $35, $40 cook stoves into the Uganda market. So that creates a question, you know, what do we do about that? Do we try and find some sort of compromise and bring in a slightly inferior cook stove that at a cheaper price to start to sensitize people to the concept of spending more money for an improved cook stove? Or do we just have to invest a lot of time and energy and money into getting the market up to speed in terms of this is what a cook stove costs, this is what you're going to have to be prepared to pay for it, but these are the potential benefits, in the hope that maybe, you know, in 12 to 24 months, the Ugandan market will start to catch up with the Kenyan market. So these are all sort of real challenges that face EcoZoom right now, that definitely get in the way of our ability to scale. So I guess the point is we need to be very adaptable, and we need to think about different strategies for different markets to grow the company. Yeah, sorry, should I carry on?
If you have more to say about scaling is not linear, sure.
No, I was going to talk about there are multiple paths to scale, but I think I should hand back to you now.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So there are multiple pathways to scale. Thanks, Ollie. Scaling in the social sector is really about scaling your impact. And there's many ways to do that. Growing the size of your organization is just one of the ways that you can scale your impact. So we're finding that scaling pathways generally fall into 4 different buckets. One of those is grow. So grow, you know, meaning, you know, establish new branches, new offices, like Ollie's saying, you know, EcoZoom expanding into Tanzania, or grow your headquarters to deliver more. So add new products and new services to your current suite of offerings. Another pathway is affiliate. So that's where you could franchise your model, license your technology, or create strategic partnerships with others to implement your model. The third bucket is disseminate. So this is about using open source data and providing that data to multiple partners to use however they see fit, or providing technical assistance to other organizations. And the last bucket is influence. So that's really about advocacy and lobbying and awareness raising. A lot of the activities that the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stove does for our sector. So an organization can really take multiple pathways at the same time, or just one pathway, or evolve to new pathways over time. It really just depends on your goals and your core competencies. So Ollie, I'll let you give a couple examples from EcoZoom on this.
Sure, yeah, again, very much current challenges that we're facing. Obviously, I mentioned in the brief introduction that EcoZoom was initially a cook stove company, and we sort of migrated into a durable goods company, bringing our own solar products to the market. And now we're sort of thinking, well, where do we go next? Aside from geographies, which we've already just mentioned, we have a number of different ways in which we can grow the business. We could, for example, expand the current product portfolio into other cooking or solar products. So, for example, do we go into solar irrigation? Do we go into fuel-efficient pots and pans and cooking utensils? That would be one option. Another option would be to expand the existing theme of cooking and lighting, but into different business units. So I already mentioned, we've had some success with partnering with microfinance institutions, and that's primarily because our products range in the $35 to $60 mark, which is a lot of money to a lot of people in Kenya. But there's no reason why we couldn't start looking at launching lower priced products, sub $20 that people can pay cash for, particularly in the solar. Or we could go the other direction and we could actually start looking at launching pay-as-you-go and following more in line of what people like M-Kopa and Azuri are doing in Kenya. That's quite a significant undertaking, so these are really quite important strategic decisions that we'd be thinking about. Or we just stick with the existing range and we just focus on geographical expansion, and that would certainly keep the business more simplistic, but perhaps we'd be missing an opportunity to catch some of the people that we're missing in the markets that we're currently selling. So again, how do we diversify the business? How complex do we want the business to be, considering the resources and the expertise that we currently have? Can we get hold of those resources, or do we keep the team lean? So these are all kind of challenges that we face in how many paths we have to scale.
Great, thanks, Ollie. The last key takeaway from pivoting to impact is around these common roadblocks that occur on the road to scale. So really, there's no one formula for scale. Every organization does it differently. But what we're finding is that there are a lot of common roadblocks that organizations are going to come up against on whatever pathway to scale that they're taking. And while we found these roadblocks and pivoting to impact, looking at the experiences of just 3 organizations, all of these roadblocks really resonated with cases 15 years of experience working with, studying, and supporting social entrepreneurs. And they also really resonated with my experience at EcoZoom. So we're going to dive into each of the roadblocks, explain the roadblock a little bit, and then give some examples from EcoZoom that relate to that roadblock. We have about 4 or 5 minutes for each roadblock, so sorry if we're rushing a little bit through them. We want to make sure that we have time for your questions at the end. Also, when we're going through a roadblock, if you feel like your organization has also had a similar challenge related to that roadblock, and maybe you did something well, maybe there's something you would have done differently, put it in the chat window for us so that we can read it out and just promote learning across all of our organizations. So with that, we can dive into the next slide, which is the first well, I think it's a list of all the roadblocks. There they are. So these are the 5 roadblocks that we'll be going through. Starting without gas, driving blind, sticking to the map, traveling alone, and ignoring the 30,000-foot view. So roadblock number 1 on the next slide is starting without fuel. So this roadblock is about not having the right foundations in place for your scaling pathway. And we found 2 key lessons here for social enterprises. The first key lesson is that you need to hire or train the right team for scale. So recognize that different skills are usually required as you move from pilot testing to scale. And you need to figure out how those different skill sets and your needs are changing as you move from phase to phase. And skill sets really need to match your chosen scaling pathway. So for example, if you're scaling through partnerships, relationship management, of course, is going to be a critical skill that your team will need. However, if you're scaling through open source data, of course, technology skills are going to be more important. The last bit around this is to really think about your governance structures and to think about your governing body as part of your team. So having the right governance structures in place can really support and accelerate your growth over time. And the second lesson is around infrastructure. So build infrastructure for 10x or more. So as much as possible, think about your longer term needs. Scalable financial management systems, program management, monitoring and performance management systems, all of those must be in place to sustain your growth and to promote future growth. So if you have resources to invest in these systems, it's going to pay off in the long run, assuming you have an idea of what you need in those systems. If you're too early stage and you're not really sure what you need yet, use low-cost systems, off-the-shelf systems, plugins from Google. Like, there's lots of resources out there now that you can use and really learn about the needs of your business before investing in a more expensive system. And Ollie has a couple of examples from EcoZoom on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely the one that sticks in my mind is hiring and training the right team for scale. And I mean, this is particularly challenging if you need to remain being adaptable, and you might need to pivot and change your strategy. You know, how do you know what that team even needs to look like? But hiring the right people, even to begin with, can be a challenge. And I think in the very early days of EcoZoom, we made a few bad hires because we depended too much on gut feel or rapport. You know, if the person seemed to talk the talk and they seemed to fit well with the organization, then that would influence our thinking. You know, as we've matured as an organization, I think we have a much more structured and scientific approach to our hiring process. What I mean by that is we actually have a local HR recruitment consultancy that we involve in all of our hiring. They actually sit in the interview with us, and they really challenge us on our own thinking. They ask us fairly pertinent and objective questions to sort of challenge why we think this person might fit, and even ask us specifically, you know, what are we looking for in this role, and get us to think more objectively about somebody. So, for example, you know, just recently, when we were currently going through the process of hiring a commercial manager, which is a really important role for us, and the person hiring really liked that person, but the independent consultant pointed out that that person didn't actually ask any questions, and that a commercial manager coming in at quite a senior level should be very, very interested in, you know, what's the strategy, what's your revenue, what's your operating profit, you know, what are your expansion plans. And it was a bit of a light bulb moment that, yeah, that person probably isn't right for us, but we wouldn't necessarily have seen it like that. So the team that we have now, most of them have joined us in the last 12 to 18 months, are much, much stronger as a result of that process. So I would say it's very, very important to have a very structured and objective recruitment process that's consistent. It doesn't matter whether it's a senior role or a relatively junior role. You have to be very consistent to make sure you're getting good quality staff.
Great, thanks, Ollie. I'll just add to that, like, as you know, one of the founders of EcoZoom, I think one of the things that we would have done differently back in the beginning was to actually create a formal board of directors for the organization. We had a really informal advisory board to start with, but they weren't really active with us. And so we feel like we missed out on getting a lot of direction from people more senior than us, because we were all first-time founders. So it would have been great to have this board of directors that was strategically recruited that could help de-risk key areas of our operations. So for example, like getting a supply chain expert on your board, or somebody who had experience manufacturing, or you know, any number of things. It could have been really valuable for us and could have helped us not make a bunch of mistakes that we did that were you know, costly mistakes. And when you're working in a low margin, high volume business, you know, any mistake that you make like that feels like a big one. But one thing that we did well on that, I just want to give a shout out to Ollie. Somehow we found Ollie and hired Ollie. And Ollie has an amazingly strong operations background, and he was able to come in to lead the expansion, you know, when we first opened the EcoZoom East Africa office, and has really taken that office to profitability in a short period of time, because he's been able to really cut OpEx costs, operating expenses, down low, and get the product priced right and get the right partnerships in place. So kudos to Ollie, and you really need somebody with a strong ops background on your team.
Thanks.
Let's see, I don't see any examples from participants on this one, so we can move to the next roadblock and the next slide. Thanks. So this roadblock is called driving blind. This roadblock is about not setting clear processes and tripwires that indicate when it's time to pivot. So 2 lessons for social enterprises here. 1, standardize and document your processes. This sounds pretty obvious, but it really doesn't happen that much. It's hard for people to kind of take time out of the day-to-day to document things. So do that so it can be implemented consistently by staff and by partners. The second lesson is create tripwires for cost and impact. So tripwires are key performance indicators that signal to you when something is wrong with your model and you may need to pivot. So failure is inevitable, just know this, but you need to know when to move on from a failed experiment. You need to have the key performance indicators in place to tell you what failure is and to tell you when you need to change up your strategy. This is key to scaling. So you need to set these for both cost efficiency, but for impact. You still want to make sure that you're having the intended impact that you want to have. And this is definitely an area where EcoZoom has a lot of examples of things that we could have done differently. So Ollie, I'll let you launch into those, and probably we did some things well in this area too.
Yeah, so I mean, if I can talk about the second one first, create tripwires for cost and impact. This is really, really critical. You know, in the early days of EcoZoom, we were kind of, you know, busy fools, if you like. We were working very hard, and we were, on the one hand, seeing some success. People were liking our products. The business was growing in terms of revenue and the size of the team, but we just weren't making money. And the reality of that is, you know, I don't think we were asking ourselves hard enough questions and frequently enough to be sense checking whether the business model that we were growing was actually viable. When I think we really started to do that, we realized that, you know, it wasn't that we weren't, that the product wasn't popular, it wasn't that the team was incompetent, it was simply that we had grossly underestimated the gross profit margin that you need to earn in this kind of market. You know, so doing business in Africa particularly, well, I mean, it's probably a bit easier in Kenya, but it's more challenging in places like Tanzania and Uganda, where people are marginally poorer and the infrastructure is a little bit less developed. But there is a huge sort of cost of doing business. You know, for those of you that follow the news, we've just had an election in Kenya. The whole economy slowed down. Now we're having another election in another 5 weeks. So the economy is going to slow down again, and you know, all of this has a cost. All of this impacts on your cost of doing business. Transport, distribution is very expensive, particularly the last mile distribution. And I mean, we learned the hard way. We had to learn by making mistakes and learning from experience that the cost of doing business is actually a lot higher than you might think it is or want to think it is. And what I know now in our business is a 25% gross profit margin, forget about it. That's never going to get you to profitability. 30%, yeah, maybe, but really you need to be up in the 35, 36, 37% gross profit margin for the business to actually be, for you not to be just constantly chasing your tail. So, you know, don't underestimate the margins, and you have to be very business focused. I mean, I think a lot of social enterprises, they're started with a social mission in mind, and that takes up a lot of the bandwidth, that takes up a lot of the focus. But at the end of the day, the business needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be run and managed like a business. And you need to be looking very early on, you know, what are the key metrics that we need to manage to make this business a success. So I think in you know, if I could turn back the clock, we probably would have been a lot keener on those kind of numbers, maybe 12, 18 months before we really cottoned on to the importance of those. Do you want me to talk about standardizing and documenting processes, Amanda, or do you want to handle that?
Sure, I can do that one. I think that's some things that we did well at EcoZoom in some respects. So one example is product training. So training end users on proper use of the cook stove is a core component of our scaling unit. People don't know how to use the cook stove. They will maybe try to use it once and then abandon the cook stove and go back to however they were cooking before. So we really took care to document our training process thoroughly and share that process with all of our new customers. We also encouraged piloting for our global customers, recognizing that our cook stove isn't a good fit for every market. So we wanted to make sure that our customers were buying the right product for them and the people that they wanted to get the cook stove to. So we encouraged piloting, especially in areas where we were less familiar with the cooking context. So we documented the process that our partners should go through to pilot our cook stove. We suggested that they pilot cook stoves from other companies side by side with our cook stoves, and really wrote down survey questions that they can ask people, things they need to be thinking about, monitoring and evaluation protocols for them, anything to help them make the right decision about which cook stove to purchase. So yeah, those are a couple of good examples. Ollie, anything else to add? Or it looks like we have an example from David Smith. He says, our experience in Ghana is that 40 to 50% margin is required for profitability. It is just the way of doing business in Africa.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, obviously your GP is influenced by what kind of business you do and how much infrastructure. I don't know whether the cost of doing business is slightly higher in Ghana than Kenya, but absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're now at a point where we're aiming to get to around a 40% gross profit margin. Yeah.
Great. Cool. Well, let's move on to the next roadblock and the next slide. So roadblock 3 is called sticking to the map. We have 3 lessons here, and this roadblock is really about organizations not continuing to iterate and pivot along the road to scale. So the first lesson is, yes, continue to iterate and accept failure. So enterprises, we find, are really great at iterating during a pilot and expect to iterate during a pilot, but stop after that. So this process of iteration should continue as the enterprise grows, because many parts of your model will not be designed to be scalable at the beginning. You really need to build that in over time, as well as build in new innovations to improve your model. So many organizations are embracing this now by having a labs component to the organization to design and test these experiments. Another lesson here is about adapt to each unique ecosystem. And I'm sure we can all really appreciate this one. So take the time to understand each new community that you're working in. Find the incentives, the motivations, the barriers, the competitors, the potential partners, just everything about that new ecosystem that you're working in. And adapt your solution as needed to that ecosystem while maintaining whatever is core to your scaling unit. And the last lesson is be opportunistic. So as the ecosystem evolves around you, new opportunities, new partners, new funding sources could emerge. Look out for them and take advantage of them. The catch here is that if you're not looking for them, you won't see them. So you really need to look up from what you're doing to check out what's happening in the ecosystem and what's your role in the ecosystem. So Ollie has a couple of examples here too.
Yeah, so I think combining the first, continuing to iterate and being opportunistic. I think a prime example of that is our decision to bring solar to the market. So for example, when EcoZoom was just starting out, we were just a cook stove company, as I said, and we realized that there was this synergy between solar and cook stoves, but we didn't really know much about the solar market. So really what we did is we acted as a trader on behalf of another solar manufacturer, a company called Greenlight Planet, who were already present in Kenya. And that was an opportunity. You know, we realized there was an opportunity there. We started working with solar before we knew it in Kenya. Actually, more than 50% of our revenues were coming from solar, and we felt that it was a bit inconsistent because we were kind of selling EcoZoom stoves that were manufactured by EcoZoom and had EcoZoom branding on them, and at the same time we were trading somebody else's solar lights. So as we got experience in the market, as we got an understanding of you know, how to sell solar, we realized the next logical step was for us to actually launch EcoZoom solar products, and that created a bit more consistency in terms of what does EcoZoom do. Now EcoZoom only sells EcoZoom products, and that's the way we want to keep it. But like I mentioned before, that doesn't mean we need to stop at cook stoves and solar lights. I mean, we could get into water filtration or something like that. We could expand the product portfolio, having redefined ourselves as a durable goods company that sells pretty much any product potentially that improves lives, saves money, and preserves the environment. So I think any business to be successful needs to continuously be prepared to be fairly opportunistic. And I think one of the criticisms I have of funders is they're very keen to sort of pin you down. What is your strategy? And the truth is, the reality is, that even if it's uncomfortable to say it, is the strategy is that we'll keep changing whatever we need to change to make the business a success. But that's obviously not necessarily what people want to hear. So you need to kind of phrase that in a way that's sort of acceptable. Do you want me to carry on, Amanda, or do you want to chip in?
I was just going to chip in that I feel like EcoZoom has really, from 2011 to 2015 at least, was really in like a high phase of experimentation. You know, trying out new sales channels, new products, new training methods, new partnerships, new processes. Was kind of all new everything, and the industry, you know, was and like still is evolving and changing a lot. And I feel like this kind of experimentation was necessary at the time. Which was great, and we were really open to doing that experimentation and iterating on our model over and over again. But you know, something we might have done differently, in my opinion, was that everything we were doing was research and development. So we never really like honed in on like what is core to, you know, what is our scaling unit, like what is core to us, like what is our, you know, quote unquote secret sauce, and focus on that, hone that in, and try to grow that, and then have a separate like budget line item for research and development, so that you can continue to iterate on, you know, what you've already got dialed in. So we could have done that differently, and maybe tried to have like a separate labs component to the organization. And I'll add in anything else. David Smith has another comment. Thanks, David. That it was a good choice to diversify, and that we sold solar, power, lights, cook stoves, and water filters. Definitely. Mm-hmm. Thanks, David. Yeah, Ollie, do you want to add any more examples under this roadblock or move to the next one?
No, let's move on.
Okay. Great. So the next roadblock is called traveling alone. So this roadblock is about not taking advantage of partnering with others to do less better. So 3 lessons here. Number 1, let go to go farther. And sorry, there's a typo on that one. So social enterprises often are filling multiple links in the value chain while they're proving out the market. But over time, this can change. So you really need to know like what is your special sauce. And thanks to Ollie for telling me that special sauce is really an Americanism. So special sauce is, when I say that, I'm talking about like your unique capability as an organization and like the unique value that you can add as an organization. So knowing what your special sauce is will tell you when you should build something, you know, meaning that you need to keep it in-house, and when to buy something, when you need to outsource it to somebody else, letting go of some control, but also allowing you to go faster. Another lesson here, allocate the time required. So really don't underestimate the time and resources required to partner effectively. So I'm sure we've all had that experience that it takes months, even years, to get a pilot going with a new partner. And when time and money are tight, you really need to prioritize those partnership opportunities by whatever criteria is important to your organization. And last lesson here is seek complementary, not competitive partners. So by understanding your competencies really well, you can better assess the competencies and motivations needed by your partners so that you guys can align your skill sets and not duplicate your skill sets. Because if you and your partner have the exact same skill set, you're probably missing some other piece that's really important for scale. So Ollie, I'll let you jump in with some examples here.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that the one thing that we really did well in EcoZoom is quite quickly identifying what is our core competence and focusing on that. So, you know, I think our core competence is understanding what customers want and launching products accordingly. You know, that customer feedback loop, listening to end consumers, understanding what they want and allowing that to influence our products, and then being quite quick to react to that. So our product portfolio has grown quite significantly over the last couple of years, and we're getting quicker and far more efficient at updating our product portfolio. Now, of course, there's multiple things that we've outsourced. You know, we don't manage factories. We've outsourced all of our manufacture, and until recently we'd actually outsourced all of our in-country distribution in Kenya. It was only about 3 months ago that we took that in-house and started purchasing vehicles. As we got to a kind of a critical mass of volume, but by being really lean and just trying to focus purely on what we know that we're good at was a key element to us getting to profitability. I think with our special sauce, I think that basic management competence is a vastly underrated skill. You know, you can have, and I think this is particularly the case in social enterprise, because like I say, social enterprise is often driven by charismatic leaders who identify a genuine need, a social need, a health need, an environmental need, or whatever it is, and they say, right, I'm going to start up a social enterprise. And because they're charismatic and because they're passionate, they raise a lot of money because they can convince funders of their cause. But none of this actually means that they're particularly good at running a business. As in the day-to-day, the hiring, the firing, the implementing processes, the analyzing accounts and understanding what does this mean, and like I said before, understanding what kind of margins and the implications of that. So, you know, I think that for any social enterprise leader, they need to be very honest with themselves and understand, you know, what do I bring and what are my deficiencies and what support do I need? And I think more often than not, that support is basic management competence.
Great, thanks, Ollie. So we'll move on quickly to the last roadblock. So roadblock number 5, ignoring the 30,000-foot view. So this roadblock is about not zooming out from the day-to-day operational details of the business to see opportunities and to avoid opportunity costs. So we have 3 lessons here. The first, use focus to find opportunities. So having a laser focus on your special sauce and your scaling plan doesn't close you off to opportunities, but instead it really opens you up to the right opportunities. And you can better leverage your skills to take advantage of new initiatives, new partnerships, and ways to evolve to achieve greater impact. The second lesson is zoom out to see opportunity cost. So really don't get too caught up in the day-to-day that you can't see when something really isn't worth it, when it's costing you more time and money than the impact that you're getting out of it. So you really need to take that time out every once in a while. And the last lesson is balance impact with maximizing cost efficiency. So as you scale, you have to maximize cost efficiency. You have to find ways for your scaling unit to get cheaper as it scales. And if you can do this, you can scale faster. And Ollie, anything to add about what we might have done differently in on this roadblock?
Not really, other than to say I don't think we ever really did it, and I'm not sure that we can do. In fact, when I read the report, ignoring and I read this roadblock, I realized that yeah, we still don't do that. You know, on a day-to-day basis, we're so sucked into the day-to-day management and the challenges that are sort of very real and present, that you know, I as an organizational leader don't take enough time to step back and really ask myself, you know, where are we going? Where is the business going to be in 3 or 5 years? So I think there's a lot more that we could be doing in this regard.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ollie, and this was our experience, me and the other 2 co-founders of EcoZoom, that we didn't zoom out enough. We really got caught up in the day-to-day way too much. And if I could do it again differently, I would have strategically taken the time out every quarter to really assess what's working well and what's not working well, and use a key performance indicator dashboard to add some data to that conversation instead of making it our feeling about it. And I would try to probably, you know, define our scaling unit, like define our special sauce, and really try to develop that earlier than I feel like we did. And incorporate ways to make our scaling unit cheaper as it scales. Right now, our unit, you know, our unit costs like just kind of keep increasing. You know, our scaling unit costs are not getting cheaper as we scale, and so we need to figure out ways to kind of modify what we're doing so that we can scale sustainably. So with that, I know we only have a few minutes left, but we'd love to take your questions about any of the scaling roadblocks or our experience at EcoZoom. And I think Kavanaugh is gonna ask the questions.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yes, great.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Ollie. That was a really terrific, and I think we can all agree, a very honest assessment of what you would have done differently and what you thought you did well with regards to navigating that challenging road to scale. We do have some time for questions, and I hope many of you can stay back maybe a little bit beyond the allocated time so that you can hear some questions from our respective colleagues. A few emerging themes have come up with some of these questions, and many of them are really terrific. So I think I'm going to start with some questions have related to kind of the makeup of EcoZoom's funding, especially with regards to you know, how much of the company, maybe from initially until now, some of it's come from grants or loans, how much of the organization has now been able to rely purely on sales of cook stoves, and you know, if you had any initial resources, if you received resources from funders, you know, can you name some examples of those funders and how you worked with them? So we'll start with that.
Sure. Okay. So just so that I understood the question correctly, I think is the question, you know, how much of EcoZoom now is dependent on grants versus sales?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
If that was the question, yeah. So we don't have any grants. We don't pursue grants. We haven't received any grants in the last 2.5 years. We are a purely commercial, sustainable private sector business. And that's actually a strategic decision that we took to make, having received grants, because I think the grants are a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, what happens in, you know, you see a grant up for sale, it's a huge amount of money, and you think, oh, wouldn't that be nice to have all that money? So you write a proposal, but actually quite often that proposal is committing you to do something that you wouldn't otherwise do, and actually proves to be a bit of a curse, because it ends up being a massive distraction from you know, what you need to do to make your business sustainable. And when we were in the early days of EcoZoom, we did have a few grants, and what it ended up doing is making the business more complex. We had lots of commitments, lots of projects that we were managing, lots of balls that we were juggling, and you know, the reality is all of that grant money goes into those projects. You know, it doesn't really help you actually grow your core business. So we took the decision that we would only pursue a grant if we can honestly say this was going to be a core part of our strategy anyway. And this grant is the icing on the cake, because it's basically funding something that we would normally do. If we can't honestly answer yes to that question, then we just don't pursue it. And that has created a lot more efficiency and a lot more focus, and has helped us, I believe, get to profitability.
Yeah, I'll just add that EcoZoom does do a lot with loans. Debt financing is really important for EcoZoom, so that we can finance our inventory. EcoZoom to date hasn't really had that much equity investment. So the founders of EcoZoom, along with Ollie and other key staff, own the majority of the company still. We have one local investor in Kenya who does own part of the EcoZoom East Africa entity and was an equity investor there. But really it's been about getting debt financing for us.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And we are now at the point where we are actually looking to raise equity. We're hoping that we're going to raise a sum of equity in the next 6 months that's going to fuel our geographical expansion. We want to start replicating the success that we've had in East Africa in other parts of the world. But I think in some ways it's a good thing that we're only now getting to the point where we're actually looking to raise equity, because it's kind of, by not having money, it sort of forced us to develop a very efficient and lean operating model that we can confidently take to investors and say, you know, we know how to make this work. So now if you give us money, we know exactly where it needs to be deployed, and we're confident that we can make a success of any secondary or tertiary office in you know, half the time for half the cost. So I think it's kind of it's a good thing in a way that we didn't raise a lot of equity earlier on, because I don't think we would have used it wisely and efficiently.
I totally agree with Ollie on that.
Great, and a few questions relating to kind of the portfolio of products of EcoZoom, and how much of it is you're making most of your profit off cook stoves, how much of your sales is with regards to solar products, kind of just a quick background of the nature of these kinds of product sales.
Yeah, sure. So I said that EcoZoom is currently doing about $2.5 million in sales combined. That's the two separate companies combined. I think about 70% of that, 65 to 70% of that, is cook stoves. The lights are only really strong in Kenya. Currently, all of our global trade, which is about 40% of our business, that doesn't involve any solar. That's all cook stoves. But what we are looking to do now is actually leverage some of those customers to start selling the solar products to them as well. So how the balance of cook stoves versus lights will change is yet to be seen. But in terms of profitability, we don't want any weak links in our product portfolio. You know, we're very, very margin focused now. So any product that we look to launch, regardless of whether it's a cook stove or a solar light, we have a minimum gross profit criteria, and if it doesn't hit that gross profit, then we don't really consider it. So I mean, you know, if you took the solar out of EcoZoom, we probably wouldn't be profitable, and if you took the cook stoves out of EcoZoom, we definitely wouldn't be profitable. The whole is definitely greater than the sum of the parts. but yeah, they're all important components to the business.
Hey, Ollie, can you add in a little bit about the distinction between us selling in developed countries, like the US and Europe, versus emerging markets, and how much, like what % of our revenue comes from each of those? Like % of revenue and % of volume?
Yeah, so this is all the global trade business. Yeah, within global trade, we sell to developing countries. This is particularly bigger volumes and slightly thinner margin. We sell to partners in Zambia, in Ethiopia, in Somalia, Nigeria, also places in South America as well, Latin America, Mexico, Guatemala, but it's very, very sort of Africa heavy. We do also sell to developed markets. We have a great partnership in the US and Canada. We sell to the UK, Germany, Netherlands, Australia, Japan, South Korea. These are relatively small volumes, and it's all for the camping/recreational market. So it's also quite seasonal. It's very, very popular. Basically in sort of Q1 and Q2, we have good sales from those customers who are ramping up for the European and North American summer. It's not our core focus as EcoZoom, but it is an important part of our business because it's got a much higher margin. It's a very lucrative part of the business, and it helps us keep our products affordable for the base of the pyramid, which is obviously what we're primarily focused on.
Great, thank you. So speaking of margin, one question was with regards to how did EcoZoom kind of figure out increasing gross margin, particularly maybe in markets where households and consumers cannot pay for stoves that cost more than $40 US, and especially if these are going to be higher quality stove products?
Sorry, how did we maximize the margin?
Yes, exactly in kind of lesser developed markets with lower ability to pay consumer base.
Yeah, good point. I mean, the fact is, whether it's a $35, I mean, a $35 sale and a $40 sale can be a massive difference in gross profit margin. That can be the difference between a 20% gross profit margin and a, say, 35% gross profit margin. We operate in a very, very price-sensitive market where a seemingly small change in price can have a massive impact on your business. What we realized is because most of I'd say at least 50% of our sales or 60% of our sales in Kenya are sold through financiers. Okay, it could be a community bank, it could be a microfinance institution. Equity Bank is doing a big program which includes our products. What we realized is when a person is taking a loan and they're financing a product over 6 months, it really doesn't make a massive difference to sell the product for $40 plus cost of finance versus $35 plus cost of finance. That's five extra dollars financed over 6 months. It doesn't really make a huge difference. It's certainly not enough for them to say, oh, well, that's too much for me, I'm not going to buy it. Because the return on investment is still there. The cost saving to them, to the end consumer, is still there. So I guess the point is, don't underestimate the value of your products. And of course, we all want to try and keep our products low. And initially, we sort of thought, well, by bumping up our margins, are we exploiting the poor? How do we feel about this? Is this ethical? But the reality is that's what you need to do, unfortunately, to make the business sustainable. So it was a combination, really, of tinkering around with our product and reducing some unnecessary cost. For example, the product that we sell now is a little bit smaller. But that gives us a better container fill. We get 500 units extra in a container, and what that means is it's actually about 50 cents per unit cheaper to ship. Again, that's like potentially 2 or 3 extra percent of gross profit margin. So by getting our costs down and bumping our prices up, but within acceptable limits, has really revolutionized our business.
And then to that point, as you've been kind of increasing gross margins, how have you been managing your inventory, especially with regards to, I believe if I understand this question correctly, with regards to retail and distribution?
Yeah, so we don't really do much retail for a number of reasons. One is you need a big infrastructure if you're going to start managing retail outlets. Obviously, your operational expenses go through the roof. Your distribution costs also go very high, and it's a much more complex operation to manage. But the main reason we don't do retail is because, like I say, our products require people to have some access to finance, and if we set up a shop without any financial solution, we're not really going to sell products. So we've achieved an economy of scale by working with financial partners like microfinance institutions. We are considering potentially retailing directly to the end consumer, but in order for us to do that, we would need to expand our product portfolio to incorporate lower priced products, probably sub $20 products, that we're confident that the base of the pyramid can purchase without needing some kind of microfinance. So that's not a challenge. I mean, that may be a challenge that we face in the near future, but at the moment, pretty much everything we do is wholesale.
Okay. We have one question here. Let's see. Yeah, okay. One individual asks, are there risks of losing the social mission when the business gets better?
Are there risks of losing the social mission? I don't know what when the business gets better means. Does it mean gets more organized or more profitable or more kind of corporate and complex? And I mean, in the latter, yeah, perhaps when you have several layers of management and you have somebody at the top making strategic decisions who's perhaps lost that kind of that frontline connection with the end consumer, that's definitely a risk. I think one of the things I feel has helped for me to be successful is prior to EcoZoom, I was actually a volunteer with a management advisor with an organization, an NGO called Voluntary Service Overseas, where I was actually living in a little village up country for 18 months, living and working with people that are now our target market, and I feel that it's given me a very, very valuable insight into how our target market lives, how they think, what kind of challenges they face on a day-to-day level. So I think that if we grow as an organization and we have more people coming in at a senior strategic level, yes, we don't want them in their ivory tower in Nairobi, driving to work all the time. We definitely need to make sure that we maintain the discipline of having them going out into the field and really connecting with the target market. It gives them a very valuable insight into what people are saying about our products, what kind of challenges they face, and how that should influence what kind of products we bring to the market.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I think it's a risk for any social enterprise that to increase your gross margins, to up the price of your product, and then take yourself too far up market where you're not having the impact that you've intended. And that's why I think this lesson in pivoting to impact around setting up tripwires for cost as well as impact is really, really important, because if you're not regularly surveying your customers to figure out who those customers are, like what their income level is, and making sure that those are the customers that you want to serve, it's definitely a danger that you can stop having your intended impact. So EcoZoom, does that. We do customers surveys, phone calls with them. We're figuring out who they are, how much money are they making right now, how is our product helpful for them, how much money are they saving on fuel, that kind of stuff. And that really guides our strategy, like Ollie was saying, not to pursue retail, or not to pursue getting in, larger scale retail that's maybe more at market than we want to go. And so working with local distributors and making sure that financing is available for customers who need it. But yeah, great thing to watch out for any market, any sector, anywhere.
Yeah, especially with regards to the financing. Could one of you discuss a little bit more about how you partner with MFIs, risks and opportunities with regards to these kinds of institutions, and maybe an example of, a little more detailed example of how the MFI works with EcoZoom and how they help finance your products?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there are multiple challenges working with MFIs. I could be here all evening talking about this. They are often very bureaucratic. It can take weeks, if not months, sometimes to even figure out who the key decision maker is and getting in front of that person. Quite often, I mean, they're primarily focused with making loans and making money from loans. So selling green energy products is actually a distraction from their business, and they don't, quite often it can be a bit of a problem child that nobody in the MFI management structure really wants to take ownership for. So you have to kind of make it very, very easy for them. And so what we do is we kind of take all of the hard work away from them. We do our own sales and marketing effort. So we actually, sorry if I can just backtrack a bit. I mean, another thing that we need to consider is different type of MFI. So there are branch-orientated MFIs where people go to a branch with a specific need in mind. Maybe they need, $250 to buy a cow, and they sit at a desk with a loan officer, and that doesn't really lend itself. That operating model doesn't really lend itself to selling our products. The MFI, or the structure in an MFI that we've really worked with successfully is what I call outreach MFIs, where a loan officer, gets on a matatu and he or she goes to meet 30 women under a tree somewhere on a Tuesday morning in the local village, and that really works for us because we can send an EcoZoom marketer with the products out to the community with the loan officer and pitch the products to 20 or maybe even 40 people at a time. And so, operationally that's much easier. It enables an economy of scale that you otherwise wouldn't get if you're selling, a product one at a time from a branch. But we do all of the hard work for them. So we do the sales effort, we provide the marketing materials, we manage the stock, we do all of the transport to a branch level. So I mean, it's taken us, months, years, in fact, to really kind of bake the cake, so to speak, to really figure out what's the right recipe for working with an MFI. And even then, we don't want to be complacent and say, when we approach new MFIs, with the first meeting that we have, we very much say, look, we're here to learn. We just want to understand your operating model, and we want to understand what your priorities are, what are your concerns, what do you want from us. We don't kind of impose, one idea of how we should work with an MFI onto every other business that we meet, because that just doesn't work. They all have slightly different idiosyncrasies in their operating model. So I don't think there's any kind of specific formula. We obviously are continuing to learn as we approach new microfinance institutions.
Terrific. I think we have. We'll take one more question for this live session. However, For those who asked these terrific questions and would still like a response from either Amanda or Ollie, please feel free to email your question to info@cleancookstoves.org, and we'll try to get a response to you within the week. Maybe to kind of wrap things up in a full circle way, the question about, in your opinion, were the initial, as you've explained, Ollie, that EcoZoom has moved beyond reliance on grants, but when it first started out as a startup, how critical were these grants to its initial success, and what kinds of lessons maybe you have for other startups that are pursuing grant funding, and the risks and opportunities with regards to that, and how they can manage donor expectations while growing and growing in profitability.
Yeah, so we did have a few grants. We had a grant from the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, actually, the Spark program. And in terms of understanding the usefulness, if you like, it's a bit difficult to say, because it was actually that we were actually given money for 4 different work streams to pursue, and I think if 2 of those were very, very valuable, and 2 of those, if I'm honest, were what I alluded to earlier, a bit of a waste of time, because they were a bit of a distraction and they hadn't been clearly thought through. I think my advice would be, again, just to reiterate, only pursue a grant if it's core to what you were going to do anyway, and furthermore, you got to have an exit strategy. If you're paying wages from a grant, then you need to understand how are you going to get out of that situation. How are you going to get to a point where you are a sustainable business independent of that? And if you can't see that, if you think, well, we're going to have to get another grant, for me, I wouldn't pursue that. I think that's very, very dangerous. I mean, there are, in my opinion, Nairobi is the sort of the epicenter of social enterprises in the world. Probably there are social enterprises here that have been operating for 9 years that are still dependent on grants. Not in the cook stove space, I should add, but I think that's very problematic. I mean, they could have probably foreseen that scenario 4 or 5 years ago, but perhaps just for whatever reason haven't dealt with it, and I don't know whether they're even dealing with it now. So, yeah, by all means, take a grant, but don't build your business on it, and understand very early on how you're gonna wean yourself off it.
I agree with Ollie, and I think it's really important to find the right type of funder. So if you're in startup phase, there are a lot of really great funders out there where you can get like an experimental grant from, or kind of like a phase 1 grant from, to help you figure out a lot of things in your business model before you're profitable. With EcoZoom, from 2011 to 2013, we were running the global business. We didn't have any grants. We did everything with founder and family money. And that money really went to buying a container of stoves that we could sell in the US market and actually make some money off of, so that we can have that money to experiment with the business. So if we weren't able to have that, the business wouldn't have taken off. And so if you're not in the position where you can, sell something to people who have lots of money at a price, where your margin is really high, then grants can be a really good option for you. But like Ollie said, you can't become dependent on them, because it'll cripple your business over time, and a lot of time it'll take you in directions that you probably don't want to go in, because you're trying to stick to the milestones in the grant. And now that I'm on the funding side, I just want to tell everyone it's better to be transparent with your funders and let them know when things are going wrong, like what failures you've had, when you think milestones need to change, like when it's not a good fit for your business anymore. I think a lot of people are afraid to do that, and we have some really great examples from these case study organizations of times when it was a total failure what we were funding, and they told us about it, and one organization even gave us the money back. And you know, it was all in the way that they handled it, and you know, their rationale behind giving us the money back, behind shutting down all of their operations in Central America, that we kept in touch with them and gave them another grant later. So really, and I know all funders don't promote transparency, but we really need in our space more transparency between funders and social enterprises.
Great. Amanda or Ali, do you want to just kind of conclude the presentation now?
Sure. I just want to encourage everyone to download and read the Scaling Pathways series. I felt like it was a really valuable experience for me to help create the series and then to relate it to my experience at EcoZoom. So like I said, we have, you know, some components in the series now. We're starting phase 2 of Scaling Pathways in the next couple of months, so there'll be more knowledge products on scaling that we hope are going to be helpful to you. And thanks for coming.
Great. Ali, any parting thoughts?
No, thank you, but thanks for giving me the opportunity to share our learnings. It's been fun.
Terrific. And thank you both so much, Ali and Amanda, for this terrific presentation. And thank you, everyone, for sticking with us till the end. I do highly encourage all of you, if you had not had the chance yet, to download and read Scaling Pathways. It is a wonderful resource, and there's definitely been a great community that's been built up around sharing these lessons and discussing them in these communities of practice. Thank you all for your time again. As a quick reminder, this recording, apologies, this presentation has been recorded, and we'll be sharing a recording within the week, and please share that within your networks and among your colleagues. If you have any other suggestions for potential webinars we can host in the future, please do share those at info@cleancookstoves.org. And if you have any further questions that you would like to have our presenters answer, please also do get in touch with us at that same email address. Thank you again, and have a great day.